An original.
From Story Studio Network.
Once around the park, James, and don't spare the horses.
Let's get ready to rumble! It's showtime.
Yeah, here we go. Look at the crowds are standing on their feet. They're cheering. The Leafs have finally done something noteworthy.
Predictable.
Something predictable, yes. Welcome in. It is On the Ledger Ontario Politics Podcast, May the 10th. Dad's birthday. Dad would have been 86 years old today.
Wow.
Yeah, and we have flowering trees in the backyard of our house here in Toronto. And on his birthday, without doubt, is the day they boom into blossom. So
excellent.
Today they will hit their peak. And we'll go out and have a good conversation with Dad in the backyard. So,
nice.
Welcome in. Dave Trafford here with Keith Leslie. John Wright is back with us. We had a bolo out for you last week. Just we thought, where did John go? And then I didn't hear from you for a couple of days. I thought, oh boy, this can't be good. But it sounded like you got down a bit of a cyber rat hole last week.
You know, it's funny because when you travel nowadays, and it happened for the first time, even using VPN and other methods, you can still have some kind of thing go wrong with being infected in the computer and when you start to go online. So it was one of those perchance things where I was in a hotel and I clicked what apparently was the wrong connection. It wasn't the official one from the hotel. Somebody had put something else there. Boom. Before you knew it, for the next 48 hours, I was absolutely crushed. So I apologize, but it wasn't Mother Nature. It was Mother Tech.
Yeah, you get the cyber handcuffs on all of a sudden. You can't really do anything about it. So, you know, there's no truth to the rumor, Keith. You're throwing your hat in to coach the Leafs?
No. They talked to me. They did approach me, and I just said, I just don't think it's a winnable team at this time. Maybe a few more years.
See, you know what I'm thinking, though? I would do it because Sheldon Keefe has proven two things. You don't have to have any experience to get the job, one. And the second thing is you don't have to win. You get good pay. I mean, holy shit. The guy got fired, and he's just starting a 2-year extension. That's not bad. It's bad.
It's a good life. It's a good life. And as you say, the experience isn't always required. But you're set up from the day one to be the scapegoat at some point.
Oh, entirely. Yeah.
It's just part of the job. You will be fired publicly, humiliatingly, because you screwed up and we have to blame, or we screwed up and someone's got to get the blame.
Yeah, indeed. Well, that'll be, the chorus of conversation over the next probably month or so while we don't get a chance to watch the hockey team play. The off season at least has something to talk about. All right, here we go. A couple things after the by-elections last week. And, of course, John, we were talking last week, Keith and I, just about, the results and the implications of it. And it's easy to say, the premier went in and spent a lot of dough and was able to, by virtue of the privilege of being in government, able to, spread the largesse around and, make big promises, cut checks, whatever. And they out-politicked the Liberals. And Keith and I kind of moved to the idea that there was an extinction event, really, 2 elections ago for the Liberals. There was that sort of shimmer of the corpse in the last election. Still didn't do any better. In fact, a little bit worse. It's on a slow decline. Everybody thought Bonnie Crombie in the chair would ignite things, and that would be good for the party, and away we go. But I begin to wonder whether or not this is just a slow decline that they're not going to recover from. Perhaps are we on the verge of seeing the next, sort of big blue machine 2.0 with Doug Ford redefining what conservatives are in Ontario. So this is kind of what we were thinking. And then Keith passed along this piece from Mr. Grenier at the Writ talking about, it might not be the Liberals in Ottawa that are the problem for the Liberals in Ontario. There just might be a structural issue with the party in Ontario that's showing no signs of coming back in any way. Yeah, they've got these kind of flat numbers right across the board. But there's no sense that they're not even gaining Trudeau voters.
Well, yeah, that may be true, but I'd say a few things, having observed this kind of phenomena a few times in my career. Number one, the Trudeau Liberals are in the worst shape that anybody's been in since the Mulroney years. And so there is some kind of drag there. People at the door are not as sophisticated as people like you and I. And a liberal is a liberal is a liberal, so they might not show up. Number two, you've got a by-election where, in fact, it's usually an anemic group of people who may vote. They stay home. They don't care. They go about their daily business. It's just politics. There's nothing at stake in terms of the overall picture. So you lose on that ground. Number three, the Ford government has done a really, really good job in framing Bonnie Crombie about taxes. And it's got a great ground game. And there were some other things about the Liberal candidate which were controversial to some of today's issues. So there was a combination of factors that could have caused an overall drag on the Liberal brand and getting out the vote in that riding. No question whatsoever about it. But I'd also like to say that by-elections are like this. We haven't had the Bonnie Crombie Liberal 2.0 yet. We haven't had the advertising. We haven't had the issue. We don't know what it's going to look like, when we finally get to the actual election campaign. So I think it's a combination of factors, and I'm not really buying, based on the results that we've seen that this means that we're writing off the Liberal Party, already for the next election campaign. I think there's a number of factors here that, Grenier has looked at the polls, but I think there's some outside factors that have had some influence on this for sure.
Well, sort of two parts to that then, Keith, because on the one hand, there are the people who watch it closely, like us, and the guys who are doing polling and everything on a weekly basis and so on, or monthly. That's one thing, and there's a certain expectation those numbers will reflect a quick response in terms of Bonnie Crombie's presence, and if you don't see it, then it's a problem. But on the other hand, we're back to attention span of the general voters. So why do you burn the powder now rather than waiting and igniting it at a more strategic time closer to an election? It's one or the other. You can't have both.
Well, I think the Liberals probably should have put, and maybe they feel they did put enough of an effort into the Milton by-election. I don't think they did. It was supposed to be, the polls were telling us it was very close. We couldn't even tell whether it was going to be Conservatives were going to hold it or whether the Liberals were going to be able to take it from them this time. But it ended up being a 10-point spread. A huge spread, really. I know we only had like 28% of the vote out, of eligible voters out. It's a provincial by-election. But that means signaling a couple of things to me. One is that by-elections are a great time for a protest vote against an unpopular government. No sign of that if you're winning 48% of the vote in a by-election. No sign of a protest vote at all. And to Grenier's point, I think, was that the federal Liberals in that area are still polling at about 66% in some areas. And that if they could capture just a handful of those, they would have been able to take the by-election. I don't know how sound those numbers are. It's a one-riding. Surveys are always, notoriously variable in their numbers. But John, you seem frustrated with this point.
No, I always, and never with you.
No.
More with, Eric should
more
know
with me, but
Eric should know better, for goodness sake. We're talking about what was the actual spread in the outcome, 1,000 plus votes. I mean, it wasn't like it was 5,000 or something. Secondly, when you're doing polling, and there was a poll that was done by Liaison ahead of time, which actually showed, I think, the Liberals being ahead. Or being closer than the way it was. What are you dealing with? You're dealing a sample size of 300 sample in a riding that's big, and a spread of 1,000, just over 1,000 votes for the actual outcome. And it's kind of like, guys, if you want to compare, if you really want to do the job, go in and do an 800 sample before and then do an 800 sample after and do the crosstabs on federal versus provincial leaning members and do the math. Don't kind of go searching for pieces here and there and say, aha, there we go, the demise of the Liberal Party in Ontario. So again, I look at what he did and it's all great speculation, but to say that all of this is dancing on the heads of pins of, what was it, 1,300 votes? Is that what it was? I mean, if the right ballot question, the right advertising, and the right motivation comes about for the next election campaign, that could be completely different. So I'm a little more skeptical on the cross-tabbed assertion of what happened in that riding.
I got a message on X, Twitter last week about the show, John, and it said, listening to Friday's On the Ledge pod, how is the electorate so apathetic? How are people on the ground actually this ignorant to what is happening in the province? I'm so dismayed that only the corporate elite seem to benefit. Absolutely heartbreaking. My answer back was, I'm not sure whether or not it is apathy or, there's no sense of dissatisfaction with Doug Ford.
No, but there may be some of that, and meaning that there isn't as much dissatisfaction. It goes to all the other issues that I said, though. I mean, look at the ridings out in that area. They're you've got the suburb vote, which is the swing vote, but right now you've got good ground game by the Conservatives. Let's give them all the points. I mean, they've got the most money, the most eager reasons for making sure that was there, whereas the Liberals decided to punt and not even have Bonnie Crombie there. Like, they made the decision not to be in the game, right? They had a nice showing at the door and, they worked well. But you're up against the big blue machine part 2 in this province. And they take these things very seriously. But I still don't discount the fact that, it's not the summertime yet, but it is a by-election. These things happen. People stay home. There's not as much at stake. It's kind of like, it's like betting on the Leafs during the regular season as opposed to being in the playoffs. You know that there's 2 different teams that show up. So that's kind of where I think things are at. Well,
and by the way, thanks to Leah for the note on Twitter, and you can reach me at Dave Trafford on all the socials, Facebook, X, Threads. I'm there once in a while, Instagram and LinkedIn. But again, it kind of goes back to my point around attention span too, right? I mean, the idea that, I get it, but good God, I'm busy because we're into spring and I got a whole bunch of things I have to do, whether it's, the kids are out playing T-ball season started. It could be that. I mean,
we're happening and people are not, tuned right in. What the last thing most people would have seen was Doug Ford last September saying, I messed up the Greenbelt policy. I'm sorry, I'm going to reverse it. They're not looking at all the little, of course, there's been more Greenbelt developments every week. There's 1 or 2 more little links that make the government look just as bad. But that reversal and apology seems to have taken the issue, just right out of most people's minds for the most part. They may look in later when it gets closer to election day, but for now, there's no huge hue and cry or anger at the Ford government. There's certainly pockets of anger, but there's no one massive protest vote that this government's got to go, halfway through its second term. I mean, to get 48% in the by-election, again, that says everything, I think, about our government. And the fact that Ford is this populist, not a small C conservative or a big C conservative, he's a populist. He's willing to change his mind on things. Yes, he seems to shoot first and ask questions later and then have to do some reversals, even though everyone's advised him ahead of time. But people don't seem to hold that against him or his government. They seem to think, issue by issue, they can take what he's doing and they accept his leadership at this point. No big desire to look at the NDP or the Liberals.
Well, and even that comes to the fore today when we get that story out of the Star, John, talking about newly released documents tell a different story, that one of the premier's inside folks was meeting directly with Greenbelt developers, and it was on their private email. And again, all really interesting fodder for the gallery, but I don't think it moves the needle at all.
No, the only significant issue that will come out of all of that is whether or not the RCMP decide that there's something that's going to come out of all of that. Otherwise, it's a little bit like, trying to get ready for this podcast, and the odd time Keith Leslie's microphone has lots of buzz in the background. I mean, this is just kind of this, noise going on out there when everybody else is going about trying to put groceries on the table. I have a poll out this morning that talks about how high grocery prices are and the expectations of the Canadian public, and it's kind of like, 97% of people in this country don't expect grocery prices to get any lower before at least Thanksgiving. That's what people are concerned about, not the minutiae of whether or not some executive assistant in a trove of emails and texts actually, said something here or there. Having said that, it's still an ongoing drumbeat below the surface of something that happened that may, in fact, become part of a different story if and when the RCMP decide to report.
Well, we had deleted emails at the latest, not the one that was reported today, but earlier this week, there was more deleted green emails on personal email accounts from developers to government staff using personal. Then they're all deleted and they're gone. Let's remember back under the gas plant scandal under the Liberals, Dalton McGuinty's chief of staff went to jail for deleted government email.
Correct.
So it's very, very serious, but it's certainly not something it doesn't even lead newscasts. It's not top of mind for people. It's interesting for those of us following the Greenbelt story. We dig into it, but it's not front page news. These develop, even though I think if it was just starting out, they would be. But Ford's reversal and people think, well, he's doing, they're dealing with that. No, there's a lot more stink to come. But to John's point, it'll only really hit the fan when the RCMP decides what they're going to do and announces it.
Well, but the other thing, too, is, you'd have to say this, that unless the Premier himself is charged with some malfeasance or something, then there may be even ways to deflect that. So I'm not I'm not trying to project out where this is all going to end up. As we even have gas plants back in the news now, and how the province is dealing with it. That was a bit of a retro wind to those days. But the Premier himself has a Teflon quality to him and how he's able to deal with these things. And, it can be easily eschewed that, hey, it didn't get to my desk. Actually, it was acknowledged in the reporting, if you saw that the original report on the individual involved said that he basically hyped up his connection with the Premier's office in order to kind of bake in some authority in terms of where he was going. So even at the outset, there was some skepticism about whether there was real connectivity to the Premier's office and to the Premier himself. So, I think this is a slow burning problem, but it could be months and months and months before it gets to be water cooler talk, although I don't think we have any water coolers anymore because we don't have any people back in the office. So I don't know what you call it now, but just, cyber chat. Let's call it that.
Story out of southwestern Ontario this week. A family is talking about moving their 83-year-old mom into a long-term care facility. She's been in the hospital since before February was when she was discharged. The long and the short of it is the hospital saying, you've got to go. Here's a long-term care facility that we want to put you in. The family saying, no, it's just, it's not up to standards. It's not a place where we would put mom. They had other options. They were full. Quick to the end of the story, they're charging them that $400 fee. And
a night.
What are they up to? $8,400?
For the 1 month, and then last month will be $12,000. So they're up to $20,000 so far.
Yeah, so, on a daily rate. And then they're also charging them for the services they would otherwise have to pay if she were in the long-term care. To the family's benefit, they're saying, we're happy to pay that because that was our intention anyway. But there's no bloody way we're paying this fine. This sounds like lawyers and courts getting involved in a hurry on this.
Well, families are in their absolute worst position. Mom or dad needs to come out of the hospital bed they've been occupying and get into long-term care. They've picked 3 ones. The family's been going through this. Been a lot of sometimes it's rushed on you right away. Sometimes families have had time to think about this. But all of a sudden, the hospital says you're discharged, and now the Ford government has passed a law where the hospital says if you don't take the long-term care home that we're sending you to, and in the southern part of the province that can be up to 75 kilometers away, in the northern part it can be up to 150 kilometers away, you have to go, and we say, or else we're going to start charging you this $400. The family said no, we're waiting. And it ended up just this month in May. They did get accepted. Mom got accepted into a home that was her first choice, actually. So the family's now facing what it looks like it'll be about, in total, about $26,000 or $27,000 bills for her occupying that hospital bed until the bed of her choice came available in a long-term care home. I think for sure there's going to be, I don't know if it'll end up being a class action, but I can see any families that are put in this position suing the government back because there's just no choice. It's not, they're not in a position to take the patient home. My family went through this. My mom was in a hospital bed for months. In fact, the whole ward was was people waiting for a long-term care bed, essentially. People who should have been in long-term care. Well, there was a whole hospital ward of them waiting to go. Not a huge one, but enough that it makes a difference. Forcing families at that point to accept a home, especially if it's a distance where, you're trying to visit every day, all of a sudden you can't. And people, a lot of people are going into these places because of dementia. And they don't understand why their family's not seeing. They don't understand why they have to go to another place. All of this is just a horrible time to be hitting families with thousands of dollars in bills because you won't accept the home. And the family goes and inspects the home. They said they were shocked at the condition of the home that they were expected to move her into, and they just didn't want to do it. It has been, fortunately, it's only been, I guess, somewhat under 3 months in total for this family. that quickly adds up to a hell of a lot of money at $400 a day. And who can afford that? Who can afford that? And as you say, they're paying the other. It's a percentage that they pay for the services in the law that would have got along. They're all for that. It's just this $400 a day penalty. And I think they have every right to fight it. And someone needs to take this to court and see if they can get the government to back down.
Well, what strikes me, John, is that when the health minister's asked about this, she says, yeah, we think that there are other people who are in this case, but we really don't know the number. I mean, how can she not have a handle on this?
Well, she does know.
Of course she does.
Politicians, my goodness, are always so transparent and tell the truth about everything, right? Look, this is an issue that we've talked about previously that is going to escalate over the next number of years by the sheer fact and weight of the demography and the silliness of a Ford government that says that a bed is a dwelling. For goodness sake, there's going to come a point in time where not only will there be a lawsuit against the province for something like this, where there'll be an adjudication made. Maybe that's going to happen with this, who knows? But there will come a point where, the weight of seniors who need to be housed, to be looked after in care settings that they can't afford is going to be upon us very soon. I'm getting on in age. I'm not at an advanced age, but I have to tell you at this stage, I'm thinking more about it than I did 10 years ago. It's not that far off in the future that some ailment can get you down. Somebody like this individual slipped and fell and broke their hip. My gosh, that doesn't happen to any elderly person. It's the number one cause pretty much of hospitalization, and then the rehab on top of that is terrible for elderly people. So, we shouldn't be surprised at this happening now, but my goodness, the weight of it that's coming is going to be huge. Like, it's just, go to Stats Canada, look up demography, cross-tab it by Ontario, see how many people are currently 60, and project out, anybody above that for the next 15 years. My goodness, there's going to be a lot of fines going on unless this is dealt with in a different way.
This week on Now and Next, we got into the conversation around what's going on at the Toronto Police Service and posed the notion that this police service, Keith, is in a crisis of integrity. When we go back to the Zamir trial, the comments from the judge suggesting that, that didn't really look all that good. In fact, her language was far stronger in terms of the testimony offered by 3 police officers who were eyewitnesses in that murder case, that the OPP is coming in to investigate the undercover unit. Now we've got Stacy Clarke. She's a superintendent with the police service. She has pleaded guilty, accused of giving officers questions. Originally, it was questions and answers, we were told. Now it's just the questions that were on the exam for promotion to sergeant. So that's bad enough because, again, the chief comes out and says, well, yeah, I get that she did that, but we still think that there's there's a place for her in the police service. Yesterday, when she's being cross-examined, Wendy Gillis at the Star writing that, stressing it was not an excuse, on the one hand, says Clarke, what she did, but essentially saying, I did it because, well, it seemed to be sort of the normal thing to do. There are others who did it or who claim to do it. Now, she can't put a finger on anybody who did it, that is to say, offered up the questions beforehand, etc. But there's a certain understanding that in the police culture, at that level, in the management level, the command level, this is going on. So, holy shit, what does that say about from stem to stern, from the chief right down to the rookie cop on the beat?
That it's not unusual for officers getting tested for promotion to have been given copies of the tests in advance or the test questions in advance. It is shocking to a huge degree. On the other hand, in this particular case of Clarke, up till this point, what I'd read and what I'd been following on was basically she was trying to help out younger black officers to get promotions because she felt that her concerns, speaking as a black officer, and her concerns about, I don't know if it's racism within the force, but just lost opportunities or whatever, that she wanted to help these young officers get ahead. So after she said she wasn't being listened to, she felt she was being ignored. And so she, out of frustration, took a used her phone to take a picture, I guess, of the test questions and sent them along to officers who did not request this. I don't know. It strikes me that there's certainly something to what she's saying about she felt that strongly. Someone who rose that far in the police service, first Black woman to ever get even close to that height, that she felt the need, and she's pleaded guilty, to do this. What motivated her? There's got to be more than just a desire to break the rules or scoffle at this, or that everyone else is doing it. That one sort of caught me as strange, that it happens that others have done this, but as you say, she can't point to who or when. Perhaps it was a common practice, but I thought she was on firmer ground in my mind by saying she was trying to help younger Black officers get promoted because she felt that their concerns were being ignored, or that they weren't being listened to as a group. I think that holds more sway than the old, well, everyone was doing it. As you say, that just leads back into the whole question of the authority, I guess, if we want to do it, or the respect for the Toronto Police Service, which seems to be at a very low point following the chief's comments after the acquittal of the murder charges.
There's a nugget in all of this that I don't understand why is not being played up more, but the case for internal discrimination and exactly what she was saying that was going on was dealt with by the Toronto Police Service's board. And they passed a motion saying to the Toronto Police Service and the chief to supply the questions ahead of the exam. And the chief and the TPS did not implement it. They didn't. That's public fact. So, I mean, part of this is to look, and I think that's why, the police services are actually going, well, we don't want to throw her out. And in fact, we don't want to demote her this much. We want to just demote her a little bit because there's something else here. Like there is a body buried and no investigation that's, shed some light on it. So why the real issue to me is what is the prima facie case for the chief and the TPS to disregard the ruling of the Toronto Police Services board to implement something that she just went ahead and did? I mean, she basically says, look, if the board says that it's happening and the board says that these questions should be handed out in advance because there's some inherent discrimination, I just followed what the board said that should be done. There you go. I mean, isn't that the real case here? Well, police services, what do they say to answer that? Well, since it's under investigation, we have nothing to say until the blah, blah, blah. We'll make a statement at a later date. For goodness sake, the board passed the rule and you decided not to implement it.
Well, but that's not her defense.
Well, I know that.
Right?
I know that, but to me, an observer from the outside that's not caught up in the, internecine aspects of what goes on downtown at police headquarters, it seems to me the real issue is when you've got a body that is answerable to the public that says to the police, this is what we think should be going on, particularly in a matter of discrimination. And the police get the envelope and then go, I'm sorry, did anybody see that envelope come in? I don't know where it is. I mean, there's something going on here that is not right.
Well, again, it speaks to the integrity of the police service.
Correct.
It doesn't matter how you cut this anymore, because even Keith, at this point, where if Stacy Clarke is saying that this is a matter of making sure that Black officers or racialized officers have the same opportunity as the white officer who wants promotion, that's one thing. But what she did, it actually undermines that whole problem. I mean, it's great to wave the flag, but by doing what she did, it only opens the door to undermining the whole idea, because, the argument being they got a promotion they didn't deserve only because they got the questions beforehand, not because of their merit of their abilities to be, good sergeants on the police service.
And tell me the other police officers on the force don't know who they are. They do know.
Oh, entirely.
Yeah.
Oh,
so
for sure.
Those people have not been, they may have indeed gotten the promotion. They haven't been helped. Others, as you say, are looking at well, you got that promotion because you were given the answers, for God's sakes. How's that help anybody? So this whole thing, I guess integrity is the word. And I mentioned when we last discussed this following the acquittal at the trial, that it needs more than just the OPP investigating the Toronto Police Service. I think it needs a judicial inquiry. It needs a judge looking into the Crown Attorney's role and all of that, as well as what we're seeing now for the integrity of this police service. That alone needs to be examined. If only you would think for them to restore public integrity and confidence in the service.
Yeah. So email to the AG. Really? Can we get this? I mean, there's nothing going on a Friday anyway. Why don't you just fire off the note? Let's get this done.
Can I just say one thing, though? I mean, I just had a kid graduate from university. And I know lots and lots of professional organizations who do this. But last time I checked, a professor to hand out subject areas and questions is not out of question. I mean, we could talk about open text essays, exams for that matter. This was supplying the questions. It wasn't supplying the answers. I mean, this does happen. So I don't know exactly what the questions were, but this happens in every college, every university, every high school, lots of professional organizations who do this. And it says, you know what, study up. Know this stuff before you get there, and we'll base you on the substance of your remarks. So I don't.
But even if that, I don't disagree with you, except in this case, there were selected candidates who got the photos of the questions that she decided. Yep. And let's remember, one of them was a family friend, and one of them she mentored.
Yeah, I know Dave, but I mean,
there's a whole. It's very messy.
Yeah, it is messy because I think, you know what? There's 3 white guys here who don't, who are not even applicants to the police service, who never have to go through that in their entire lives. So for her to see it firsthand, right up close, what is she supposed to do with it? I mean, she stands up and takes on the police services. She's gone, and not only that, she's smeared and dumped because that's what would happen. So I don't know. There's a part of me that really is with her on this. That as someone who is standing up against the system of the thin blue line that doesn't recognize the opportunities for others, that's an endemic situation that is based, my comments are based on fact. That's over and over and over and over again. There have been reports on this. How can you sit in the chair as an underrepresented minority, knowing that the Uber body has said, supply the questions, but that the white guy sitting in front of you says, oh, I'm not going to do that. Like, I get it. But I think at the end of the day, it'll be interesting to see not just the disciplinary board, but how the TPS itself reacts to this. Because, man, if I was on the Toronto Police Services board, I'd have a hard time keeping my mouth shut on this one. That's for sure.
Well, if the AG isn't concerned about that, then there's, sort of in keeping with what we're getting from the health minister this week, because not expressing any concern about the diminished supply of doctors. Really? What freaking planet are you living on?
Holy cow. I mean, I know this is a negotiating stance with the Ontario Medical Association, but you don't look at all our doctors' negotiating group and say, it's not just a major concern to retain and recruit and retain doctors in the province of Ontario, where there's over 2 million people without a family doctor. It's just ludicrous to even say that. And as the OMA said, it's insulting and it's dangerous. I mean, you're just saying there's nothing wrong in the system, and there clearly is. And it's it's dangerous to be saying this, for a government to take this position when we know full well, as I say, there's just that one number alone, over 2 million people without a family doctor, let alone the government in its negotiating stance saying, recruiting and retaining is not a major concern. It's just ludicrous.
Well, let me take it a slightly different way. And for someone who did the polling for the Ontario Medical Association for 8 years and started under, I think Bill Orvan was the president then. Actually, that's how I met my wife. My client said, there's this young woman down the hallway, you should marry her. So I just did what my client said.
2 out of 3 doctors say, John, you should meet this woman.
Yeah. But it was the doctors that asked for the arbitration, and the government gave it to them. So it's kind of like we're a union, right? Like after all these years of saying, we're not a union, and everybody wink, wink, nudge, nudge, knew you were a union, you're now into arbitration, and the government is committed to that. You and I know that when the education unions decide to take on the government, that even though they're not supposed to say certain things that, are going to prejudice what happens at the table, both sides do all the time. I mean, they spew falsehoods. It's positioning. They're it's not like, well, I have to be quiet because it's before some adjudicator. No, they go at it and do these things. So I think, to your point, Keith, what we had was public posturing. It's like I was watching Casablanca the other night, and it's kind of like, round up the usual suspects. I was like, what's going on here? There's no gambling allowed. Oh, here's your winnings from the table. I mean, for goodness sake, this is what is going on. And so I actually am on your side, Keith, with the facts of this case. We are short those many physicians. They are owed more. I don't know how we attract more physicians to the province if, in fact, they're being underpaid. They can say this on a per capita basis. The public grew at 8.9% in our physicians rate. The percentages are from different pools of size. So give me a break. So I put this as to being the most disingenuous, open public discourse from both sides for a posturing that's not at the table. So, at the end of the day, some arbitrator will probably side more with the doctors than they will with the province. No question in my mind, because that's the way things go, and that's the way things are likely to go.
Well, to make things worse, if they possibly could, 2 weeks ago we had the federal budget and the capital gains changes, and how that has directly affected these physicians, the family doctors specifically. And the answer from the government was, what if people, the doctors just decide to get up and leave the country? Well, we'll invite the foreign doctors to come in and fill that. What a line of bullshit. Oh my God.
I got to throw this on the table again. So I was out driving the other day, and one of the things that I really enjoy nowadays is just turning on the sports channels and listening to that as opposed to any public, any other discourse. Listening about arguing over pensions or doctors and stuff like that. But in the midst of listening to that piece, there was an ad from the government of Alberta. And it was the pitch. And it was, if you're a skilled trade person, come and live here because it's cheaper. You can own your own home. And not only that, we'll give you $5,000 to come out here, and we'll help pay for your moving. This is the real issue that's going on, and it's called the transference of personnel as opposed to the transference of wealth. And there are lots of other provinces out there that want doctors, and nurses, and they're willing to come and poach and take it. So whatever comes out of this negotiation may in fact have an impact as to whether or not some young doctor that I met at the hospital yesterday for a regular checkup, I go into this and it's for another organ of my body, so to speak. It's a good one, not a bad one. And, it's just a checkup. And there's this young woman who's sitting there. And I said, so are you now in the gastroenterology program? And she says, no, I'm a new family doctor making the rounds to learn about this stuff. And I went, first of all, thank you for picking family medicine. For goodness sake. But secondly, I thought to myself, how long is she going to be here for?
Mm-hmm.
Isn't that a real issue? And you know what? Living in Calgary is not so bad nowadays.
Well, let's leave it at that. And we'll let the folks ponder whether or not, you know what? Doesn't matter if you live in Calgary. You can still listen to the podcast. Right?
Yeah.
So that'll be all right.
Worldwide.
All right. There we go. All right. Keith Leslie, John Wright, I'm Dave Trafford. This is On the Ledge, your Ontario politics podcast for Story Studio Network.
This is SSN.
Story Studio Network.